Ask Me Anything by Redical. I'm a 95-year-old grandma from Germany who was a nurse during World War II. Proof. Imgur.com link. Hello, this is her grandson. It is her birthday today and I will be reading her the questions and translate her answers. We will answer a few questions today and then tomorrow again at noon German time. Was there a specific patient's story that left an impact on you? After the war there were lots of infections. I had to take care of many children and was living with them in an isolated station, and when they cried at night I sometimes let them sleep in my bed to comfort them. One of them became very accustomed to me, and when she healed she was extremely thankful and said that she would never forget what I have done for her. Did you ever hear from her later in life? We usually hear only about the bad memories of the war, but which is your happiest memory from the wartime? The bond between doctors and patients and nurses, because nobody knew if he would survive another day. That's something I rarely think about when pondering war. The relationships and lives of medical staff and desk jockeys. Interesting stuff. What was the best experience that you had while traveling the world? Getting to know and understand and value other cultures by traveling to their countries. Traveling to China shortly after Mao's death was the most interesting journey for me. Could you name something you experienced which made China the most interesting journey? As someone who's been seen so much during the course of life, what advice do you have for the younger generations of today? General life advice. Keys to be truly happy, etc. Always think positive and keep going no matter how hard the challenge. When you commit to something, don't doubt your ability to get it done. Major key right here. After the war, how were you treated by people from the Allied countries US, UK, France, Belgium? Did you do business with those countries? I never did business with them, but in my part of the country the US troops were stationed and they treated us very respectful. However, I heard that the UK troops did not treat people as good. I think it probably depended on what was done to that country as to how they treated the defeated Germany, USA and Canada, not invaded nor bombed. UK, bombed and attempted blockade. France, occupied and forced labor, though some collaboration. Russia, almost a war of annihilation. The Germans in the east fled the advancing Russians. The German 9th and 12th armies crossed at Tangent to surrender to the American rather than the Russians. Edit. We are talking about Germany, not Japan. Did Germany bomb Pearl Harbor or was it Japan? Hint: Japan and Hawaii are both islands in the Pacific. What was the hardest challenge for you to overcome as a nurse in this insane situation? What was the chief lesson you extracted from the experience? After a bombing, when the sirens stopped, we knew that lots of patients would come in, but we didn't know what kind of injuries would expect us. Then we had to work extremely long and got extremely little sleep, and every time the sirens were going off again and we knew we would have to continue working for many hours. I learned to not give up even when you think this might be your last day and push through no matter what. Danky. Could you give us tips for the key to your longevity? By staying active all the time. You have to keep moving and using your brain through reading and thinking. Always do something and don't adapt to a very comfortable lifestyle. Every single word of this is so true. I'm closing Reddit, for today at least, thanks to your grandma's shared wisdom. What's the most inspirational thing you've seen during your life? My Christian belief has inspired me most. If you don't mind me asking, what did you remember of the church during the war? I think the Nazi party created a national church. How did people react? Did that mean that local pastors were suddenly changed? Or did things mostly go on as normal? Did you know about Bonhoeffer and other similar figures during the war? Happy birthday. What do you think of technological advances in current medicine, in terms of patient well-being? I think patients are much better off today due to the technologies, but they are no longer treated as personal and individual as in my time. Technologies may heal the wound, but it is the personal touch that mends the soul. Thank you for your service. Was it harder to care for children than it was adults? The children were really affectionate, so number. Happy birthday from England. You must have seen a lot of development in society and technology in 95 years. What has been the most surprising for you? The attitude in society changed when so many refugees were coming from the east and we were learning to be welcoming as a society. The refugees were put into our houses and we had to adapt. The speed of everyday life has accelerated a lot. On the side of technology, I cannot name a specific one. Refugees put into houses of civilians are most likely displaced persons directly after the war. For example, 3 million ethnic Germans were expelled from Czechoslovakia after the war. Have you ever met an Allied soldier that participated in the war? If so, how did the interaction go? Did you ever treat any Allied personnel? Yes, we treated many occupied forces US troops. They were nice and they tried to learn German, and when that wouldn't work we tried to communicate with hands and feet. They were very courteous. How was life before the war? What was it like growing up in 1920s Germany? It was comfortable and peaceful. We had to work a lot, but everything was progressing at a slow and steady pace. The hectic came after the war. There were very few cars, so we used bikes a lot, or the farmers let us ride on the coach. Not sure about the translation here. Coach would be wagon. Horse-drawn wagon, I'm guessing? At what point after the war did you feel like Germany had finally recovered? I'm interested to know just how much damage a war of that scale could do to a country and its people. The Americans took all our industry, except VW, which they viewed as not important. But around 1948 we had the currency reform, and that's when things started to get better. The Americans were afraid that we would turn to the Russians for help and then constructed the Marshall Plan, which really helped the German industry get back on their feet. I would say Germany started to really recover around 1952. What was the hardest decision you had to make as a nurse in World War II? Thank you for doing the Ask Me Anything. Every time the sirens and everybody was going into the bunkers, we had to decide if we would keep helping the patients or go into the bunker ourselves. We usually kept working. When my grandmother was working in Nottingham Hospital, about 16 at the time, they would always have to move the radium patients separately into different shelters. The fear was if they were struck, radium would be scattered over a wide area. She was assigned a bucket with sand for putting out fires on the roof during raids and a pike. She also remembers when penicillin came out because it was a miracle. What's something little you did for each patient for them to know you are caring for them and not treating them as a number? Back in my time, people were treated different than today. Everybody was respected and cared for on a very personal basis. Even in the war we took a lot of time for each patient and it wasn't as hectic as today. I feel like the attitude changed. I think that a lot of that change has come from the top down. We have to be productive and make money, even though the hospital is a non-profit. The bottom line is always an issue. As a nurse, I'd love to spend a lot more personal one-on-one time with each patient, ensuring that they get the care they deserve and the education they need to be able to care for themselves once they go home. However, I'm assigned enough work that I cannot provide that experience for anyone. I can accomplish what I need to do in order to keep the patient alive, and teach them enough not to kill themselves when they are released, more often than not. However, I really don't have time to sit there and hold the hand of a patient and listen to them or ensure they aren't alone as they pass. It can be very frustrating at times. During the war there was a lot of rationing. What did you miss the most? During the war it was not so bad. The worst part was after the war when we sometimes had to eat rotten food and pick worms out of the food. Some of the doctors would collapse during operation due to a lack of food. Whoa. How did your views of war change before, during and after? I was always against war, so my opinion did not change. However, before the war I had no idea what war would be like. The war was horrible, and after the war we were starving and everything was destroyed. Thank you for your response. What was the reaction when the Führer took his own life? Thank you. We heard it through the radio in the hospital and we all started crying tears of happiness and were relieved. It brought us hope to start cleaning up the mess that the war had brought upon us. What was your opinion on the Nuremberg laws? Did things change quickly once the laws were abolished? Also, happy birthday from Canada. I was always against it. It took a long for Jews to return to their home in Germany after the war, so the effect was not immediate. Hey, my grandfather was a radio operator in a US bomber during the invasion. His plane got shot to hell. along with him in it. The only reason he got out alive is because his pilot gave him his parachute because he could not keep the plane stable enough to get out himself. Anyway, my grandfather landed in Germany as was taken in as a German POW, riddled with both shrapnel and bullets. To this day, my grandma credits German nurses with his survival and ability to return home after the war. He died of complications related to his wound when my father was 3, but him and my grandma had 3 children and were able to start her family. If it were not for German nurses, my grandmother reminds me, I would not be here today. I always credit both my grandmother and the German POW system for their respect. I just want to say thank you, but my required question is, did you see the people you were treating as the enemy, and if not, how did you relate to the people who were dropping shells all over your homeland? I did see them as a whole as enemies because they wanted to destroy Germany, but the individuals were not enemies to me. They had to fulfill their duty, and I do not think that they enjoyed dropping shells all over us. We treated war prisoners just like Germans and never felt any personal grudge towards them. What's something about the war that most people wouldn't know? The full scale of the horror, and that nobody is worth anything in a war. Everybody wants to win, but everybody ends up losing. The fear that exists because nobody knows what will happen is impossible to grasp if you have never been in a war. That's exactly what my German grandma used to tell us. Nobody's life was worth a dime. And also pray that you will never have to experience war. It's hell on earth. Double quote. Given the time, did you support Hitler while working as a nurse in the war? Just curious, cause it wasn't uncommon to think highly of him back then. I hated Hitler, and so many people had to die only because he was completely crazy. Do you think something like that could ever happen again? I imagine nobody would feel properly prepared or trained to provide wartime healthcare. In what ways did you innovate or come up with novel solutions to unexpected problems? We had to improvise a lot. Sometimes more than 20 people came in at a time, and we had to pause whatever we were doing and always choose the most important task, which was a challenge. Not really the answer you wanted, I suppose. SRY. I didn't have a particular response in mind, and this one seems perfectly appropriate and very interesting. Thanks for the reply. What flavor is the cake? Happy birthday to Be My Valentine. Edit. My highest voted comment is me hitting on a 95-year-old veteran. Walnut. Did you treat soldiers from both sides? Where were you when the war ended? How did it end for you? Thanks for watching this Redical video. Subscribe for the best Reddit videos straight to your feed 3 times a day.